The man at the center of the table had not raised his voice once. He didn't need to. Alessandro Romano sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the private dining room above Palazzo, his restaurant, his fortress, his city inside a city. 3 men sat across from him. All 3 were sweating through their shirts despite the perfectly regulated 68-degree air. One of them, the one on the left with the ring on his pinky finger that he kept twisting, had made the mistake of skimming money from the Southside numbers operation. $43,000 over 6 months. A slow bleed, as if Alessandro wouldn't notice. Alessandro noticed everything. The number, he said quietly, is $43,216. He let that settle like sediment in a glass of dark wine. Not 43,000. Not roughly 43. 43,216. He looked at the man with the ring. You bought your daughter a bracelet for her birthday. $112. Charming. The man's face went the color of old chalk. I want it back, Alessandro said. All of it. And I want it before sunrise. He stood smoothing the front of his suit jacket, black, bespoke, no tie. You can keep the bracelet. I'm not a monster. He said the last sentence with such calm that it was worse than any threat. The 3 men were escorted out. Raphael D'Angelo appeared at Alessandro's shoulder the moment the door closed. 40 years old, olive-skinned, carrying the quiet weight of a man who had watched his boss handle worse and smile afterward. The situation below, Raphael said. She's here. Not a question. Raphael paused. She arrived 20 minutes ago. Blonde. Good cover. She got through Paolo without a second look. The uniform fits. Alessandro walked to the window that overlooked Palazzo's main floor. Below, a sea of candlelight, crystal, and the low murmur of 100 conversations. He found her in 11 seconds. She was moving through the floor with a cocktail tray, her amber eyes cataloging the room with the precise efficiency of someone who had been trained to observe without appearing to observe. She was very good. She was not good enough. Alessandro had known about the spy for exactly 19 days. He had known it was her. Sienna Calloway, former Defense Intelligence operative, burned by her agency on a botched Berlin extraction, freelancing quietly for the past 2 years. For 17 of those days, he had read her file 3 times, not because he needed to memorize it, because he found himself returning to the photograph. Amber eyes, a set to her jaw that said, I have survived things that would break you. He believed her. He had made a decision that Raphael thought was reckless, and that Alessandro knew was the most calculated move of his career. Let her come. Let her believe she was running the game. Watch what she does when she thinks no one is watching. He watched her navigate a table of men who thought their hands were allowed to wander. She deflected the first with a smile, the second with a pivot that looked accidental and wasn't, the third with a look so brief and so lethal that the man actually leaned back. Alessandro's mouth curved. Just slightly. She's not to be touched, he said to Raphael. She's a planted operative. She's not to be touched, he repeated. Final. Clean. The kind of sentence that left no room for interpretation. He took the private stairs to the main floor. He didn't announce himself. The room adjusted around him the way water adjusts around a stone dropped into still depths. A ripple of awareness. Shoulders straightening, conversations dropping half a register. He moved through it without acknowledging any of it. He found her beside the bar, entering a drinks order. She sensed him before she saw him. He watched it happen. The slight tension in her spine, the fraction of a second it took her to arrange her expression before she turned. Professional. Very professional. Mr. Romano. Her voice was even. Warm. Precisely calibrated. Can I get you something? He looked at her. Not the quick, dismissive look most men gave beautiful women in service positions. A real look. Unhurried. The kind that said, I see the thing beneath the performance. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Good girl. You feel it. You started tonight, he said. Yes, sir. Elena in HR cleared my paperwork this morning. Elena is thorough. I am more thorough, he did not say. Are you settling in? He asked. It's a beautiful place. Genuine this time, not performance. She meant it, and the fact that she let something real slip told him more about her than her entire cover story combined. He nodded slowly. "Stay, after close," he said. "I have a position I'd like to discuss." She blinked. "Just once." "Of course." He turned to leave, then paused without looking back. "One thing, Miss Calloway. Sienna Calloway. Miss Calloway." He said her name like he was testing its weight. "You came here looking for something." The pause that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. "You're not going anywhere until I decide you found it." He walked away before she could answer. Behind him, he heard nothing. No sharp inhale. No fumbled glass. Just silence. "She's good," he thought again. "But she's mine now." Sienna had been in dangerous places before. She'd spent 4 months embedded with an arms trafficking network in Eastern Europe. She had survived a blown cover in Beirut with nothing but a stolen passport and a broken rib. She had sat across interrogation tables from men who wanted her dead and smiled until they believed she was harmless. She was not afraid. She told herself this now, standing in Alessandro Romano's private study at the Romano estate, 40 minutes north of the city, all iron gates and manicured silence, while he sat behind his desk reading something and making her wait. He had offered her a position at the estate that morning. Personal household coordinator, he'd called it. Access to the house, the staff schedules, the daily rhythms of his operation. It was exactly what Carlos had told her to secure. 2 weeks in the restaurant, Carlos had said. Earn the trust. Get inside the house. She had done it in 48 hours. That should feel like a win, she thought. It didn't, because Alessandro Romano had offered her the position with the ease of a man handing someone a gift he'd already wrapped and set aside. Not a decision made in the moment, but the delivery of something prepared in advance. And she couldn't shake that. She had a cover. Sophie Calloway, no Sienna Calloway, she corrected herself firmly. Keep the real name, Carlos had insisted. Harder to break a cover built on truth. She was a hospitality professional, former hotel management in Chicago. References immaculate because Carlos had built them brick by meticulous brick. She was also in her apartment bathroom every morning, staring at a photo of her brother Danny on her phone screen. 24 years old. Stupid, reckless, beloved Danny, who had sat down at the wrong card table 18 months ago and now owed Julian Nero's organization $340,000. The payment deadline was 9 weeks away. The job paid enough to clear it with room to breathe. She needed this. You're cataloging the exits, Alessandro said without looking up. Sienna didn't react. Occupational habit. I managed a hotel for 3 years. You always note the exits in case of emergency. Now he looked up. Those gray eyes, the color of a winter sea before a storm. They held hers for a beat too long. Sensible, he said. He stood and moved around the desk. He was tall. She had clocked 6'2" from the first night. The kind of height that read as authority in a room. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt. Sleeves rolled to the elbow. A scar ran along the inside of his right forearm. Old. Healed clean but deep. She did not look at the scar. He handed her a leather-bound document, the household staff guidelines. She took it. The estate runs on a precise schedule, he said. Breakfast at 7. My meetings begin at 9. The North Wing is off-limits to all staff except Raphael and my housekeeper, Mrs. Conti. You are not an exception to that rule. That's exactly where I need to get, she thought. Understood, she said. You'll have Sundays off. You'll have a suite in the East Wing, staff quarters, comfortable. You will not receive personal calls during working hours. His eyes stayed on hers. And you will not go through things that don't belong to you. The air went thin. Does he know? But his expression held nothing. No accusation. No amusement. Just the steady assessment of a man who ran a clean operation and expected others to do the same. He means it as a general rule, she told herself. Stand down. Of course, she said. Her suite was cream walls, dark wood floors, a window that overlooked the rose garden. It smelled of beeswax and old books. It was beautiful. And she hated how much she noticed that. She unpacked with the precise care of someone who knew every item in her bag was potentially discoverable. The listening device Carlos had given her was built into what looked like a phone charger. Good craftsmanship. She tucked it behind the bedside table. By 7 that evening, she had mentally mapped the estate's ground floor. By 9, she had identified the location of the security server room. By 11, she had eaten dinner in the staff kitchen, where she met Mrs. Pitchin, Conti, 60, iron-haired, warmly suspicious, and the taciturn gardener named Enzo who said 3 words and seemed to prefer it that way. She was alone with her laptop at midnight when a knock sounded at her suite door. Alessandro stood in the hallway. He was holding 2 glasses of red wine. He offered her one. She stared at it. "You haven't eaten enough," he said. "Mrs. Conti mentioned it." "Mrs. Conti is observant. Everyone in this house is observant." He held the glass out further. "It's Barolo, 2015. You'll regret refusing it." She took the glass. Their fingers didn't touch. She noticed the distance was deliberate, his, not hers. He leaned in the doorway with a comfort that said, "This is my house, and every inch of it knows my name." He swirled his wine once. "Tell me why you really left hotel management," he said. "Burnout," she said smoothly. He studied the wine. "You hold yourself like someone trained to manage more than schedules." Her heartbeat was even. "Years of practice. I managed some difficult personnel situations. I imagine you did." He pushed off the doorway. "Sleep well, Miss Calloway." He paused at the turn of the hallway. "My house. My rules." Those gray eyes found hers one final time. "All of you works for me now. Not just the part you're choosing to show." He was gone before she could find the words. She closed the door and pressed her back against it. He doesn't know, she told herself. She almost believed it. By day 6, Sienna had developed a theory. Alessandro Romano was not actually human. This was not poetic exaggeration. It was a working hypothesis based on evidence. He seemed to require no sleep. She clocked his study light on past 2 a.m. 4 nights running. He operated with a preternatural stillness, a quality she had encountered only in the most dangerous men she had ever surveilled. The kind who had long since burned through the part of themselves that flinched. He ran a legitimate empire, real estate, private equity, 3 restaurant groups, a shipping operation out of Newark. On paper, Alessandro Romano was a billionaire businessman who happened to have an uncomfortable number of politicians at his dinner table. She had been inside enough intelligence files to read the margins. The shipping operation was how the money moved. The restaurants were how relationships were maintained. The real estate was how territory was held, without a single shot being fired. The Romano family had run New York's organized crime structure for 60 years through 3 generations. Alessandro had taken the seat at 27 after his father's death, a death that the NYPD had filed as cardiac arrest, and that every breathing person in the underworld knew had been arranged. Carlos had confirmed that much. "Find the proof of how he took his father's crown," Carlos had told her. "That's the prize." She was beginning to understand that the prize was going to require getting significantly closer than she currently was. "You're thoughtful this morning," said Julia Romano. Sienna looked up from the desk in the household office, where she was cross-referencing next week's event schedule. Alessandro's sister had appeared in the doorway without sound. A family trait, apparently. Dressed in riding clothes, dark hair loose. Expression carrying the casual sharpness of someone who was always measuring the room. "Just making sure the catering confirmation is locked in for Thursday," Sienna said. Julia leaned against the doorframe. 28 years old, same as Sienna, and the resemblance to Alessandro was startling in the eyes. That same gray, that same quality of looking through things rather than at them. "Alessandro says you're good. I appreciate that. He doesn't say it often." Julia studied her for a moment longer than comfort allowed. "He also doesn't usually invite staff for late-night wine. Mrs. Conti mentioned I hadn't eaten enough." "Mrs. Conti," Julia said pleasantly, "minds her own business when my brother hasn't asked her to do otherwise." She pushed off the doorframe. "I'm not threatening you. I'm orienting you." "There's a difference." She was gone before Sienna could respond. "Everyone in this house talks like they're leaving the last word," Sienna thought. That night, she used the listening device for the first time. She had managed to get it near the study ventilation during an afternoon when Alessandro was off property. By midnight, she had 40 minutes of encrypted audio to push to Carlos. Carlos's response came at 2 a.m. Good, he's meeting with Port Authority contacts Thursday. Get names, get numbers. We need the shipping manifest connections. She typed back, I'll need access to the North Wing. The reply was immediate. Then get it. You have 3 weeks, Calloway. The clock is running. She sat in the dark of her beautiful room and thought about Danny. $340,000. 9 weeks. She thought about the way Alessandro had said you're not going anywhere on that first night, and the way it had sounded less like a threat than a fact, already recorded in some ledger she couldn't read. She pushed the thought aside and went to work. The following Tuesday, she made her first mistake. It wasn't a large one. She took a wrong turn near the North Wing corridor. Not entirely wrong, since she had engineered it, and paused at a partially open door. Inside, she could hear Alessandro and Raphael's voices, low and clipped. She listened for 40 seconds. Long enough to catch 2 words, shipping manifests and a name. Julian Nero. She filed both and retreated. What she didn't see was the camera above the doorframe. What she didn't know was that Alessandro had watched the footage twice before dinner. His expression unreadable. His only movement, the slow rotation of the signet ring on his right hand. What she absolutely didn't know was that when Carlos sent her the job offer 6 weeks ago, it had passed through a broker named Marcus Tate, who had passed it through a legal fiction called Apex Consulting Group, which had been, for the past 2 years, quietly owned by Sebastian Rossi, Alessandro's underboss. And Sebastian Rossi had not come up with the name Sienna Calloway by accident. He had come up with it because Alessandro had made sure it found him. She found the file on a Thursday. She'd been given 30 minutes in the household office while Alessandro was on a call, tasked with pulling vendor contracts from the secondary filing cabinet. The contracts were exactly where they were supposed to be. But behind the contracts, tucked with such precision that it could have been accidental and wasn't, was a manila folder. Inside it, photographs, not of the estate, not of his operation, of her, Sienna at her apartment building in Brooklyn. Sienna at the coffee shop she used for dead drops. Sienna on the phone. Carlos's number. She recognized the timestamp, 8 days ago. Sienna entering the employment agency that had placed her at Palazzo. Every photograph was dated. The oldest one was 22 days ago. 4 days before she had walked into his restaurant, her hands were perfectly still. Her face was perfectly still. Her heartbeat had gone very, very quiet, the way it did when the situation went from dangerous to critical, and her body shifted everything non-essential offline. He knew, she thought, before I walked through the door. He already knew. The question that came next was the one that stopped her cold. Then why am I still alive? She put the folder back exactly as she'd found it. She closed the cabinet. She walked back to her desk and completed the vendor contract review with immaculate focus. And from across the house, in the room where he sat at his desk with his phone to his ear, Alessandro Romana watched the single camera feed showing the household office on his secondary monitor, and watched Sienna Calloway find the file he had left precisely for her to find, and he smiled. Not with cruelty, with something that looked, if you caught the gray of his eyes at exactly the right angle, almost like satisfaction. Now she knows the game has 2 players, he thought. Let's see what she does next. She confronted him that evening. He had expected her to wait. Most people, when they discovered they had been outplayed, needed time to rebuild their composure, reconstruct their strategy, find new footing before attempting engagement. It was a predictable human response. Sienna Calloway knocked on his study door at 7:45 p.m., 46 minutes after finding the photographs, having spent those 46 minutes completing her assigned tasks without a single deviation. He respected that more than he expected to. "Come in," he said. She closed the door behind her. She did not sit down. She stood in front of his desk with her hands at her sides and her amber eyes direct, and gave him exactly 3 seconds of silence before she said, "How long?" Not a question. Not a confrontation. A demand for information, delivered with the economy of someone who did not waste breath on preamble. He set down his pen. Sit down, Miss Calloway. How long have you known? Sit down. She sat. Not quickly, with the deliberate precision of someone choosing to comply rather than being compelled to. The difference mattered, and they both knew it. He looked at her across the width of mahogany and candlelight. The evening had gone the deep blue that preceded full dark. Through the study's tall windows, the grounds were silver in shadow. I knew before you arrived, he said. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear. Calculation. She was resorting information, he realized, restructuring her understanding of every interaction they'd had since that first night. He watched her do it and found it genuinely remarkable. The speed of her mind, the control. The photographs in the cabinet, she said, were left for you, to tell me you know, to tell you that the game you think you're playing has different rules than you were given. A pause. She breathed. Even, measured. What do you want? Right now? He stood and moved around the desk, and she tracked him with her eyes, but didn't move. Didn't retreat. Didn't give him the satisfaction or the anxiety of a flinch. He stopped at the window, his back to the glass. I want you to stop sending reports to Carlos Mendez. Every muscle in her body went taut. He's not who you think he is, Alessandra said quietly. The man who hired you, the broker you dealt with, the chain of handlers. It doesn't end with a neutral party, Miss Calloway. It ends with someone who sits at my table and calls me boss, and has been planning to put a knife in my back for 3 years. She stared at him. You're telling me the job is a setup. I'm telling you the job was always a setup, and you were selected because whoever hired you believes you're skilled enough to get what they need and disposable enough to be removed when they have it. He said it without inflection. Not to wound, to inform. They don't intend to pay you. The silence stretched. He watched the arithmetic move through her face. The job, the money, Danny, $340,000, 9 weeks, 9 weeks, 9 weeks. And he watched the moment it hit her, all of it at once, and the way she absorbed it. No collapse, no panic. Just a jaw that set fractionally harder and eyes that went to a distant interior place for exactly 2 seconds before returning to his. God, she was extraordinary. How do you know about the money? She asked. I know about your brother, he said. I know about the debt. I know about Julian Nero, and I know that Nero is connected to the man who hired you to come here. He let that land. You are not in my house by coincidence, Miss Calloway. You are here because I allowed it. Because when I read your file, he paused, I decided I wanted to. The word wanted dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. She stood up, not in retreat, in something else. She walked to where he stood at the window and stopped close, closer than professional distance, closer than safe distance, close enough that he could see the faint pulse in her throat and the way she was making herself stand her ground through sheer force of will. You pulled me into your operation, she said softly. Without my consent. Yes. That's not, I know what it is. He didn't look away. I also know that if I hadn't, whoever sent you here would have made sure you didn't leave the city once the job was done. She looked at him for a long time. He could see her working through it, testing every sentence for the trap, for the angle, for the play. Then, and he had not anticipated this, she said, show me. The proof of who hired me and what they're planning. Show me. He looked at her. She's not running. She's not breaking. She's asking for weapons. He reached into his desk and pulled out a thin folder. He held it out. She took it. Her fingers brushed his. Neither of them moved for a full 3 seconds. The touch was nothing. A graze. Accidental in geography. Not in weight. He felt it move through him like a wire pulled taut. From the way her breath changed, one slight, almost invisible deepening, so did she. She opened the folder. Read. Her face did not move. Her eyes moved very quickly. Then she closed it. Sebastian Rossi, she said, his underboss's name in her voice, flat and certain. Yes. She looked up. Their faces were close. The room was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. The question was genuine, not deflection. She wanted the real answer. He told her the real answer. "Because," he said, "I have not survived 34 years in this world by ignoring the things I want." His voice had dropped. The gray of his eyes had gone dark. "And I have wanted very few things, Miss Calloway. I am extraordinarily patient." "But I am not," he said, "a saint." He closed the distance. The kiss was not gentle, it was not violent. It was the kiss of a man who had been waiting with a precision that bordered on the unbearable and had decided the waiting was done. Controlled, deliberate, and so intensely focused on her that she made a sound low in her throat that she clearly didn't intend to make. She kissed him back, not submissively, equally. Her hand went to the front of his shirt and held on. When he pulled back, both of them were breathing differently. "You're going to get me killed," she said. "No," he said, and the certainty in his voice was the most dangerous thing she had ever heard. "I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let that happen." He meant it. God help them both. He meant it. He called it a family dinner. His people called it something else. Every underboss, every captain, every significant figure in the Romano operation within a 300-mile radius had been summoned to the estate the following Friday. The dining table in the grand hall seated 40. All 40 seats were filled. Alessandro had told Sienna the night before. Not asked. Told. "You'll attend," he'd said, "as my guest. Your guest." She looked at him from across his study, where she'd spent the past 3 days in what could only be described as a controlled crisis. She was staying. She was helping him now, feeding Carlos selective disinformation while Alessandro watched the architecture of Sebastian's treachery from the inside. It was the only rational play, and she was, above almost everything, rational. It was not entirely about being rational. "Not as staff," he'd clarified. "As mine," she'd argued. He'd listened with patience. Then he'd repeated himself, which she was learning was how Alessandro Romano argued. He stated his position once, listened completely, and restated it unchanged, because he had already considered every objection and found none of them sufficient. She had come to the dinner. Now she sat at his right hand, wearing a black dress that Julia had appeared with that morning, along with the words, "Alessandro said you'd need something appropriate," and the tone of someone who was reserving judgment with significant effort. 40 men looked at her. She smiled at all 40 of them with the practiced warmth of someone who had been in rooms full of dangerous men and understood that the most powerful move was to appear entirely unintimidated. Sebastian Rossi sat 7 seats down on her right. She had seen his photograph in the folder. 42, silver at the temples, handsome in the way of men who had been told so enough times that it had become currency. He watched her with an expression of mild pleasantry that covered something colder and far more calculating. "He put me here," she thought. "He doesn't know I know that." She lifted her wine glass, smiled at him directly, watched the tiniest flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Good, she thought. Dinner was served in 5 courses. Alessandra spoke with the ease of a man entirely comfortable commanding a room. Short sentences, precise humor, the absolute authority of someone who has never needed to perform power because he simply is it. Twice his hand found hers beneath the table. Brief, deliberate. Each time her heartbeat did something she refused to categorize. The trouble came with dessert. A captain named Marco Di Lorenzo, 3 glasses of Brunello past his ideal, leaned across the table toward Sienna with the entitled familiarity of a man who had never been told no by someone he considered beneath him. "Romano finds himself a pretty new toy," Di Lorenzo said to the table at large, his grin spreading. He reached for Sienna's arm. She moved her arm, smoothly. Before he made contact, "I'm not a toy," she said very pleasantly. Di Lorenzo laughed. The men around him shifted, not in discomfort, but in the alert, focused way of people watching something about to go wrong. He reached again. What happened next took 4 seconds. Sienna caught his wrist, applied precise pressure to the nerve cluster below his thumb, and bent his hand back at an angle that was technically not quite breaking, but could be, and held it there. her expression completely serene. Her wineglass still in her other hand, De Lorenzo made a sound. The table went silent. Alessandro had not moved. He sat very still watching her, and on his face was an expression she had not yet seen. Not pleasure exactly, not pride exactly. Something more private. Something that looked like a man watching confirmation of a belief he had carried for a long time. "My apologies," Sienna said to De Lorenzo, releasing him. Reflex. The silence held for 2 more seconds. Then Raphael, from across the table, picked up his wineglass and said, "The lamb was exceptional tonight," and the room breathed again and conversation resumed. Later, when the guests had gone and the house had quieted, Alessandro found her on the east terrace. He stood beside her at the railing. Below, the ground spread silver in moonlight. "De Lorenzo," he said, handled. "Yes." A pause. "Where did you learn that?" She looked at the dark tree line. She had decided over 3 days of feeding him the information he'd shown her and watching what he did with it, that Alessandro Romano was not a man she could protect herself from with half-truths. He saw too clearly. "Military," she said. "Defense intelligence. I was an operative for 6 years." He was quiet. "I was burned on an extraction in Berlin," she continued. "My handler left me in the field when the operation went wrong. I got out alone. I left the agency. I've been freelancing for 2 years. She paused. "That's who you hired." "I know," he said. "You read all of it." "Yes." She turned to look at him. "Does that change things?" He turned to look at her. The moonlight caught the gray of his eyes. "It explains things," he said. "It changes nothing." A beat. "I was 17 when my father had Raphael's father killed to secure a political alliance." He said it simply, without drama. "I found out at 21. I spent 6 years deciding what to do about it." His jaw tightened once. "Then I did it." The weight of what he meant settled between them. "He trusted you," she said. "Yes." His voice didn't waver. "Trust is a currency in this world, Sienna, not a virtue." He looked back at the dark. "The people who use it as a virtue are the ones who get buried." She thought about Carlos, about the job offer she'd taken because she'd been desperate and exhausted, and Danny's deadline was a physical weight in her chest every morning, about being used by a man she thought was a neutral broker who was in fact the very enemy she'd been sent to investigate. "I should have been more careful," she said. "Yes, no absolution. Just agreement, delivered without judgment. So should I." He said it quietly. It sounded like something he had not said aloud before. She looked at him for a long moment, then she told him about Danny. All of it. The whole weight of it set down in the dark between them. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. "Give me his name," he said finally. "The cartel contact holding the debt." She shook her head. "That's not your problem." "No," he agreed. "It's mine now." He said it the same way he said everything, as a fact already committed to ledger. "Give me the name." Later, much later, she would think about this moment as the one, not the first kiss, not the declaration. This, a man who did not promise to try or to help or to see what he could do, who simply said it's mine now and meant it the way gravity means it, irrevocably. She gave him Danny's name. From inside the estate, through the glass of Alessandro's study window, Sebastian Rossi watched them on the terrace from 50 feet away, his phone against his ear, his expression, the careful blankness of a man revising a plan. "The girl is a problem," he murmured to the voice on the phone. "She's too close to him." The voice on the phone. Julian Nero's voice said, "Then make her disappear." The attack came at 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. 3 black SUVs through the estate's west gate. The gate guard went down first. Not killed, Alessandro would later note, because Sebastian needed deniability. Tranquilizer, fast-acting, professional. 8 men in tactical gear through the grounds. Sienna was in the library when the lights cut out. She did not freeze. She was on her feet in the first second of darkness, moving toward the door, her hand finding the letter opener from the desk in the same motion. Not a weapon. A weapon of desperation. She kept moving. The library door opened from the outside. She had the letter opener at throat height before she recognized the silhouette. "Easy," said Alessandro's voice, very low. His hand found her wrist in the dark. His other hand pressed a gun into her palm. Cold, solid, real. "Can you use that?" "Yes," she said. "Good." He moved and she moved with him, his hand on her shoulder, and she understood this was not him pulling her to safety. This was him deploying her, reading her as the asset she was. He trusts me, she realized, even now, even here. They moved through the east corridor in darkness. From the front of the house, sounds, breaking glass. A shout cut short. Alessandro's grip on her shoulder tightened one stop, and she stopped, pressed against the wall, listening. 3 men coming from the main entrance. She heard the footfall count, 2 close together, 1 slightly behind, carrying weight. Equipment, possibly. She went left around the corner. Alessandro went right. 2 seconds of silence. Then 3 shots. Not from her, from him, from the right, 2 fast and 1 deliberate. She came around the left corner as the 3rd man was raising his weapon, and she hit him with the butt of the gun in the exact right place. The mastoid, behind the ear, and he went down with the sound of someone's bad dream ending. Alessandro looked at her across the hallway. In the darkness, she couldn't read his face, but she felt something in the air between them shift with a permanence that nothing would undo. They found Raphael behind the kitchen with a laceration on his forearm and his own gun drawn, and 3 of Sebastian's men zip-tied to the pantry shelving with a thoroughness that suggested Raphael had opinions about the interruption to his Tuesday. 8 came in, Raphael said. "I've accounted for 6. 2 left," Alessandro said. "North wing," Sienna said. Both men looked at her. "That's what Sebastian wants, whatever's in the north wing." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "My father's records, the original founding agreements of the Romano network, destroy them and the legal framework holding the family together collapses," she finished. "Smart. Sebastian has always been smart." The word came out like something Alessandro was swallowing broken glass around. "Come." The 2 remaining men were in the North Wing archive room. Alessandro went through the door like a verdict, fast, final, without hesitation. She covered the second angle. It was over in 11 seconds. When it was done, when the house was secured and Raphael had made the calls and the grounds were being swept, Alessandro stood in the center of the North Wing corridor with blood on his shirt that wasn't his, and looked at her. His expression was something she had not seen before and would think about for a long time afterward. Raw in a way that seemed to cost him something, a man who had stripped off a layer of control and not replaced it. "You stayed," he said. "Yes, you could have run, when the lights went out." "I know." He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and his hands found her face, careful, precise. The same hands that had just been efficient instruments of violence, now framing her face as though she was something he would destroy worlds to keep intact. "You are mine," he said. Very quietly. The most dangerous quiet she'd ever heard. "Not because I took you. Not because you were placed here. Because you stayed. Because you looked at what I am and you stayed." She looked up at him. Her heartbeat was not even anymore. "Alessandro." "Say it," he said. "I need to hear you say it." "I'm yours," she said, and the words came out without armor, without strategy, without performance. Just the true thing, said in the dark, in the blood-smelling air of a house that was still vibrating with violence. He kissed her, and this was different from the first time, from the controlled deliberateness of that study kiss. This was desperate, grateful. The kiss of a man who had been running alone for a very long time and had looked down one day to find someone running beside him. She held on to him. Later, when they were sitting in his study with the lamps on and Raphael's wound bandaged and coffee going cold on the desk, Alessandro said, "I should have told you earlier. About knowing. About the file, the setup, all of it." He looked at his hands. "I kept you in the dark longer than I should have because I was enjoying it." He met her eyes. "I wanted to watch you. I wanted to see what you'd do." She should have been angry. Part of her was. You were going to let me keep sending reports to Carlos, she said. Filtered reports. Nothing that endangered the family, just enough to keep Sebastian convinced his plan was proceeding. He paused. I underestimated how quickly you'd matter. Matter. She held the word in the silence of her chest. There's a war coming, he said. From inside my own walls, Sebastian won't stop with tonight. She looked at him. Then we don't wait for him to try again. He looked at her for a long time, and then Alessandro Romano, the man who planned alone, always, who had kept his own counsel through every crisis of his 34 years, said, No, we don't. We, he said. Neither of them commented on it. Neither of them needed to. Sebastian moved on a Wednesday. He always did. Later, Alessandro would think about this. About how he had known Sebastian for 11 years, had eaten at his table and stood beside him at his children's christenings and trusted him with the kind of operational knowledge that constituted a loaded gun. And how the Wednesday timing should have told him something. Sebastian was a man of routine, dressed in the clothes of spontaneity. He always moved midweek. Never Mondays when guards were highest. Never Fridays when everyone was watching for the weekend power plays. Wednesdays in the slipstream of the week, when attention was elsewhere. Alessandro had been watching, but even he could not watch everywhere at once. It began at the Romano shipping terminal at Newark, a fire, expertly set, timed to the shift change when cameras were being manually cycled, 3 warehouses. $40 million in legitimate cargo, and under it the financial infrastructure of the Romano network's eastern distribution, gone in 4 hours of fire and accelerant. Simultaneously, 2 Romano captains were hit. Marco de Lorenzo, the man from the dinner, his fingers still bruised from Sienna's grip, was found in his car outside his Long Island home. 1 shot. A professional shot. The other captain, Sal Conti, made it out but lost 2 of his men. Alessandro received each call with absolute composure. He stood in his war room, the North Wing office he'd never let staff enter, with Raphael and Julia and Sienna, and watched the reports come in. Each piece of news hit the air and dissolved into a stillness. Sienna watched him and thought, this is who he is when the armor comes all the way off. Not the controlled executive, not even the man who kissed her in the bloody dark. This, the commander, cold as a scalpel. He's burning the edges, Sienna said, not coming for the center. Not yet. Alessandra looked at her. The shipping terminal, the captains. He's removing your revenue and your loyalty base simultaneously, she continued. Classic destabilization before a coup. He wants you weakened and isolated before he moves on the house. How long? Alessandro asked. 48 to 72 hours from the first strike, if he follows doctrine. She paused. He hired me. He followed doctrine. Alessandro nodded once. He looked at Raphael. Move the family. The North Coast house? Raphael asked. Tonight. Alessandro Julia started. Tonight, Julia. The word ended conversation. The evacuation of the Romano family's most vulnerable members. 3 elderly aunts, Julia herself under protest, 2 cousins with young children, was accomplished by 10 p.m. with the quiet efficiency of people who had practiced for this contingency. Raphael stayed. Sienna stayed. Alessandro did not ask her to leave. She did not offer to go. At 1 a.m., Carlos Mendez called Sienna's phone. She looked at the screen. Looked at Alessandro. He nodded. She answered. I need an update, Carlos said. His voice had changed, the careful neutrality she'd known was gone, replaced with something clipped, pressured. Afraid, she realized. He's afraid of Sebastian too. Things are complicated, she said. I need more time. There is no more time. Rossi is moving the timeline up. He wants everything you have by tomorrow morning. Manifests, the founding documents. I can't get the founding documents in 12 hours, Carlos. Then get what you can. A pause. Calloway, this isn't the job you signed up for anymore. I want you to know that I'm... He stopped. Just get what you can and get out. Get yourself out. He hung up. She lowered the phone. Alessandro was watching her from across the room. He's scared, she said. Sebastian disposes of his tools, Alessandro said. Carlos has understood what he is for some time, I suspect. He told me to get out. What did you say? Nothing. He hung up. Alessandro came to her. He stood in front of her and put one hand on the side of her neck. Not possessive, not demanding. Steadying. The way a person anchors you when the ground is shifting. I need you to know something, he said. If this goes wrong tonight, it won't. If it does. His thumb moved once. Your brother's debt is cleared. I made the arrangement 2 days ago. She stared at him. Alessandro, it's done. It was done. His voice was very quiet. Whatever happens to me, it stays done. Raphael has the documentation. She could not speak for a moment. Nothing is going to happen to you, she said. He looked at her with those gray eyes that saw everything, that had seen her from the first moment with a clarity she still wasn't entirely comfortable with, and he said simply, No, I don't intend it to. 3 hours later at 4 a.m., Raphael took 2 bullets in the courtyard. He survived both. By half a margin that Alessandro did not want to think about. Sienna was the one who applied the pressure to the second wound, the deeper one, the dangerous one, while Alessandro cleared the courtyard with a methodical fury that left no question of what he was. Raphael was talking, which meant Raphael was alive, and Sienna's hands were red and steady, and she was talking back to him in the same calm voice she used to talk Alessandro off the edge of decisions that would have caused a war. You're going to be fine, she said. You're going to be annoyed. That's fine. I am already annoyed, Raphael said through his teeth. Good sign, she said. 3 of Sebastian's men were down in the courtyard. The 4th had retreated. Alessandro tracked the direction of retreat toward the north perimeter. He turned back, looked at Sienna, crouched over Raphael, her face white under red. Stay with him, Alessandro ordered. Raphael tried. Stay, he said. To both of them. He went to the north perimeter. He came back 10 minutes later. Alone. He didn't explain the 10 minutes. Nobody asked him to. By 5:30 a.m., the house was quiet again, and Raphael was being driven to the private clinic by 2 of Alessandro's most trusted men, and Sienna was sitting on a kitchen counter with her bloody hands wrapped around a coffee mug, while Alessandro stood at the sink washing his own hands with the kind of thoroughness that said he was doing it to have something to do. He took someone, Alessandro said. He did not look up from the sink. Who? A message? His hands went still. Sebastian knows I value you. He turned, finally. His face was a controlled, terrible blank. He's going to take you from me. That's his next move. Sienna met his eyes. Let him try, she said. Alessandra looked at her for a long time. Then, from somewhere in the house, a phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. He answered it. She watched his face. She watched as it go very, very cold. He lowered the phone. He has you, Alessandra said. She frowned. I'm right here. He has Zara. Zara, her best friend. The only person in the world who knew everything. The bottom dropped out of Sienna's chest. Alessandra was already moving. They took Sienna at 6:03 a.m. She went to them. This was not stupidity. It was calculation. Sebastian had Zara, and the ransom for Zara was Sienna's presence at an address in the meatpacking district by 7 a.m. Alessandro had raged at her quietly, which was the most frightening version of rage she had encountered, controlled, surgical, his gray eyes running through every argument he had for stopping her and discarding each one when she countered it. If I go, he'll release her, Sienna said. He doesn't care about Zara. Zara is a lever. And you'll be in his hands. I can survive his hands. You shouldn't have to. She had looked at him. Alessandro. I'm trained for this. He doesn't know that. Not fully. He thinks he hired a freelance operative with some field experience. He doesn't know what I actually am. She paused. Let me go. Find me. He had taken her face in his hands. not gently. 20 minutes, he said. I'll give you 20 minutes before I tear the city apart. Give me 30, she said. I'll have something for you by then. She kissed him first. Not him. Her. She went. The building was a converted warehouse with good security and bad air. 2 men escorted her from the car, politely, which told her Sebastian wanted to look civilized for a while yet. They took her phone, found the secondary listening device in her jacket lining, took that too. Missed the third one in the heel of her left boot because it was exceptionally good work and because they were looking for 2. Zara was in a side room, unharmed, furious, tear-streaked, and, characteristically, arguing with the man guarding her when Sienna was walked past the door. Sienna. Zara's voice, sharp and raw. It's okay, Sienna said through the door. It's going to be okay. She was placed in a chair in the main room. Sebastian Rossi stood with his jacket off and his arms crossed, and the look of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Calloway, he said, almost warmly. Rossi, she said. He sat across from her, crossed his ankles. The performance of a man with time to spend. How much did he tell you? Sebastian asked. Everything I expect, she said. He's thorough. Sebastian's mouth tightened. He always was. It was very inconvenient. He studied her. You understand you were a means to an end. You hired me to gather evidence against him. I hired you to gather evidence that I intended to use to leverage him out of power, yes? Then I intended to use the original handler, Carlos, to ensure the evidence disappeared along with you. He said it with the bland frankness of a man reciting logistics. You were selected because you were good enough to get inside and desperate enough to take the job without asking the questions you should have asked. She held his gaze, except Alessandro knew before I arrived. Sebastian went still. He arranged your finding my name, she said. He fed it to you through Apex Consulting 3 months ago. He was running you, not the other way around. She watched the calculation move through Sebastian's face. The restructuring. The resorting. There it is, she thought. He didn't know that part. You're lying, he said. No, she said. But you can ask Carlos if you like. She paused. Except Carlos is probably not answering his phone right now. Sebastian stood. His composure was fraying at the edges, just visible, just enough. He paced 2 steps, turned back. It doesn't change where you are. No, she agreed. It changes where Alessandro is. As if the words were a stage direction, the building security system cut out. All of it. Every light. Every eye-catering. Every electronic lock. Sienna kicked her left heel against the chair leg, hard. The boot device activated on impact. Alessandro's technical team had told her that much before she'd walked in. 28 minutes, not 30. Impatient man, she thought. And then the front door came off its hinges. Alessandro Romano walked through what remained of Sebastian Rossi's security with the focused, annihilating efficiency of a man who had been building toward this moment for 3 years and intended to be thorough. He was not alone. 6 men with him, moving with the coordinated silence of people who had done this before and would do it exactly as many times as necessary. But Sienna noted, from where she had gotten herself free of the chair during the blackout. A combination of the letter opener she had also missed from her jacket lining and a knowledge of zip-tie mechanics that had served her in Beirut and served her now that Alessandro reached the main room first. He stopped in the doorway. She was standing, free, holding the letter opener, and Sebastian Rossi was across the room with a gun pointed at her. The 3-point geometry of the moment lasted exactly 2 seconds. Alessandro looked at Sienna. One look. Fast, complete, cataloging. She nodded. I'm fine. He looked at Sebastian, and his expression. She had thought she knew every iteration of his face by now. She did not know this one. This was the look underneath everything else. The look that existed before the control was layered on top. Put it down, Alessandra said, very quietly. This ends differently than you planned, Sebastian said. His voice had gone thin. I have Julia Nero's backing. 4 families are already Sebastian. Alessandra took 1 step into the room. Just one. Put it down. You killed your own father. Sebastian's voice cracked. To take the seat. You broke the code. My father was going to sell the family to the Moreno cartel and let them gut it for parts. I did what the code required. No drama, just fact. You want the seat? Call a council. Make the case. That's how it's done. Another step. This is not how it's done. Sebastian fired. Not at Alessandro. At Sienna. She had already moved. The bullet kissed the air where her head had been and took a chunk of drywall instead. In the silence after the shot, while Sebastian registered that he had missed, Alessandro crossed the remaining distance and hit him with the gun in a single, economical motion. Sebastian went down, and then Alessandro was across the room with his hands on Sienna's arms, turning her face to the light, checking eyes, throat, body, with a systematic thoroughness that had nothing clinical about it. I'm not hit, she said. His hands didn't stop. Alessandro, she put her hands on his face, stopped him. I'm not hit. He looked at her. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was his breathing, controlled, but only barely, only by the thinnest margin. I gave you 30 minutes, he said. You came in 28. Yes. He pulled her against him. Hard, not gentle, his arms around her with the total, ungoverned certainty of someone who had decided they were never doing this again, never being in a building she might be in, and not knowing if she was alive. Never again, he said into her hair. It was not a question. It was not a request. Never again, she agreed. From the side room, Zara's voice muffled, if someone could please unlock this door, I would like to kill whoever is responsible for the last 3 hours of my life. And over Sienna's shoulder, Alessandro said, Raphael. Already on it, Raphael said from somewhere behind them. Slower than usual, pained, still bandaged, still present, still loyal. Sienna held on. Across the room, Sebastian Rossi was conscious and restrained and looking up at the ceiling with the expression of a man calculating how wrong things had gone. Julian Nero's name was still on the board. But that, Alessandro thought, holding Sienna and feeling something in his chest that he had no prior frame of reference for, was for tonight, one war at a time. This isn't over, Sebastian said from the floor. No, Alessandro agreed. But your part in it is. They gave Julian Nero 48 hours to come to the table. This was not mercy, it was strategy. Alessandro Romano had not built an empire, had not held it through 3 years of Sebastian's patient undermining. Through the fire at the terminal and the shots in the courtyard in the night someone had taken the one person he would burn the world for. By spending resources on anything less than a surgical strike. Julian Nero ran his operation out of a private port facility in Red Hook. Legitimate shipping on the surface, cartel infrastructure underneath. 3 families' worth of political protection, a reputation built on the understanding that going to war with Julian Nero was not a war you survived. Alessandro went to war with Julian Nero. Sienna was at his side. She had spent the 48 hours between Sebastian's capture and the Red Hook operation doing 3 things. Sleeping for 6 hours. The first unbroken sleep she'd had in 2 weeks. Calling Danny, who was alive and solvent and had received a call from a legal firm that morning informing him his debt had been purchased and cleared by a third party, and preparing. Preparing meant drawing on every operational skill she had spent 6 years building in the DIA and 2 years honing in the freelance dark. She mapped the Red Hook facility using aerial data and Port Authority records. She identified Nero's security rotation. 7 men on a 4-hour cycle, 2 inside, primary protection in the northeast corner of the main building. She found a CCTV gap, 40 seconds every 3 hours, when the northeast camera panned away from the loading bay entrance. She laid it all out on Alessandro's war room table. He looked at it for 3 minutes without speaking. Then, you're extraordinary. I know, she said. Here's the entry point. They went in through the loading bay at 2:17 a.m. Alessandro, Sienna, and 4 men Alessandro trusted with his life. A short list, carefully maintained. The difference between this and Sebastian's building was that this time, She wasn't a lever or an asset or a liability. She was a partner. Alessandro didn't issue orders to her. He moved and she moved with him, reading the same geometry, thinking the same steps ahead, covering the same angles with the wordless coordination of two people who had learned each other at a cellular level. They moved through the facility in silence. 2 guards in the outer corridor. Alessandro. 4 seconds. The sound of expensive machinery continuing to hum indifferently. 2 more in the inner warehouse. Sienna, from the secondary angle, with a precision that Alessandro watched and filed away with something that felt dangerously close to reverence. Julian Nero was in his office when they found him, 60 years old. White-haired, the kind of face that had been handsome once and now had the set of a man who had spent decades deciding the price of other people's lives. He looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who had believed himself entirely safe and was now recalibrating. Sebastian Rossi sat in the chair across from Nero's desk. His hands were cuffed. He had been delivered here an hour ago, Alessandro's own arrangement. Let them see each other at the end, Alessandro had said to Sienna. Let Sebastian understand that there was no version of this where Nero protected him. Nero looked at Alessandro, looked at Sienna, looked at the 4 men at the door. Romano, Nero said. You backed the wrong player, Alessandro said. He moved to the desk and stood across from Nero with his hands in his jacket pockets, entirely at ease. Sebastian promised you the Romano shipping network, the founding agreements, the port connections, 40 years of built infrastructure. He tilted his head. You were going to absorb it. Businessmen make investments. They do. Alessandro reached into his jacket and placed a document folder on the desk. The investment is a loss. The terminal is rebuilt. The manifests you wanted are encrypted and beyond your reach. The captains are consolidated and the families you thought were aligned with Sebastian have been educated about the nature of the arrangement. He opened the folder. Inside, photographs. Bank records. Correspondence. Every transaction between you and Sebastian, Alessandro said. Every communication. Every financial instrument. He paused. 3 federal investigations will receive a copy of this tomorrow morning unless you sign the document attached. Nero looked at the document. A dissolution, Nero said. A permanent withdrawal from all Romano territories and operations. In perpetuity. Binding on your organization and its successors. Alessandro's voice was perfectly level. You keep what you have. You build nothing here. And you disappear from my world with the same quiet you arrived in. And if I don't? Alessandro looked at him for a long time. Then the federal copies go out tonight, he said, and you can find out whether your political protection is worth what you've been paying for it. Nero looked at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at the floor. Nero picked up the pen. The document was signed at 2:51 a.m. When it was done, when the folder was closed and secured and the men at the door had received their instructions, Alessandro turned to Sebastian. Sebastian looked up at him. His face was the face of a man who had spent 3 years building a coup and watched it fall apart in 30 days because he had miscalculated one variable. The council will decide, Alessandro said, not to him, about him. The distinction was everything. Sebastian closed his eyes. They left him there. Outside, in the cold harbor air, Sienna stood beside Alessandro and looked at the dark water, the smell of brine and diesel and the distant lights of the city across the water. Raphael? She asked, recovering. A pause. He called it excessive that I visited twice today. He's right. It was excessive. It was also. She stopped. Human, Alessandro said as though testing the word. Yes. He looked at the water. Losses are not acceptable to me, he said. They never have been. He paused. You changed what I mean when I say that. She turned to look at him. Before, he said, I meant organizational losses, personnel losses, territory. He looked at her. Now, I mean you. She held his gaze. Alessandro, she said quietly, I need to say something. Say it. I came into your house as a spy. I was there under false pretenses, taking your salary, sending reports to a man who wanted to destroy you. She held his gaze. I know you set it up. I know you knew, but that doesn't— Stop, he said. I need you to— Sienna. He turned to her fully. I read your file 17 days before you arrived. I spent 17 days thinking about you before I ever saw your face. I put you in danger by drawing you in, and I kept you in the dark, and I used your situation. He said it plainly, without flinching. We have both used the other. We have both risked the other. He took her hand. What I am asking, what I am offering, is to stop. She looked at their joined hands. You're offering to stop? She said. I'm offering a different game entirely, he said. One where neither of us is alone. From the harbor, a light blinked. Somewhere in the city, a siren faded. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, as if testing the simplicity of it. It's finally over, she said. He looked at her. No, he said. It's finally beginning. 3 weeks after Red Hook, the estate felt different. Sienna noticed it on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week Sebastian had always moved, a detail that made her quietly, darkly amused. She was in the East Garden with a coffee and a pad of paper, doing what had become her morning ritual, walking through the security protocols, identifying gaps, noting improvements. It was not a job description anyone had given her. She had simply started doing it, and Alessandro had watched her do it. And one day Raphael had appeared and said the boss would like to formalize your role with the careful expression of a man delivering news he found personally satisfying. Her role, as Alessandro defined it, was his. This was a definition she had argued with extensively. Operationally, she had said. What am I operationally? My eyes, he'd said. I need an actual title, head of internal intelligence. He'd looked at her. You'd be the first, because you've never trusted anyone enough before. Because I've never found anyone qualified before. A pause, gray eyes steady. You are both. She had taken the role. The Romano family's acceptance of her had been negotiated. There was no other word. In stages. Julia had come first, appearing at Sienna's office door 3 days after Red Hook with a bottle of wine and the expression of a woman who had decided to skip the part where she was suspicious and go directly to the part where she was territorial on someone else's behalf. My brother, Julia had said, pouring without asking, has not looked the way he looks at you since before our father died. Since before he had to be what he is. Sienna had accepted the wine. He looks at me like a security assessment, she'd said. He looks at you, Julia had said, like you are the only room in a building he'd walk through fire to reach. She'd raised her glass. Welcome to the family. Don't hurt him. I won't, Sienna had said. Julia had studied her. No, she'd agreed. I don't think you will. The capos came around more slowly, through the traditional channels. Respect demonstrated again, demonstrated until it accumulated into something indistinguishable from acceptance. She earned it the way she earned everything, by being exactly what she was, without performance, without apology. She was in the East Garden when Alessandro found her. He came from the house with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, which she had learned to read as his equivalent of casual, the small vocabulary of a man whose default was controlled formality and who showed you who he was in the deviations. He sat in the chair across from hers and was quiet for a moment. Danny called this morning, she said. How is he? Working. Stunned. Grateful in a way he doesn't know how to say. She paused. He wants to thank you. He doesn't need to. He will anyway. She looked at him. He asked if you were my boyfriend. Alessandro's expression didn't change. But something moved in his eyes. What did you say? He asked. I said I hadn't been given a satisfactory classification. A pause. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had brought the jacket, she realized, specifically for this, and placed 2 things on the table between them. The first was a ring, not a standard engagement ring. It was an antique piece, deep-cut garnet surrounded by diamonds, the kind of ring that had belonged to a woman who had mattered greatly to someone. It was slightly terrifying and absolutely beautiful. The second was a folded document. She looked at him. The document, he said, is a blood oath. Romano family tradition. You sign in blood. Literally, a pinprick, there's a protocol. and you become formally bound to the family. It's been done for 3 generations. He paused. It means you're protected, legally, within the family's code. In every way the Romano name provides protection. Another pause. It also means you don't leave. Not that kind of don't leave. It means the family claims you. You're not just mine, you're ours. She looked at the document, then at the ring. And the ring, she asked, is my grandmother's? His voice was very quiet. She was the only person in my family who I ever believed looked at my grandfather and saw a man she chose, not a throne she accepted. He met her eyes. I want to give it to you for the same reason. She was silent for a long moment. She looked at the ring and the document and the man across from her who had known her face before he knew her name, who had moved an empire to bring her to his door, who had cleared her brother's debt before anyone could take it from him as leverage, who had said it's mine now about her problems with the casualness of a man picking up something dropped, who had kissed her in a blood-smelling corridor and meant it more than anything else in the room. You said, she began slowly in Red Hook, that you were offering a different game, one where neither of us is alone. Yes. Only that, finally, he was not alone. This is the only game left, he said. I'm done playing the others. She reached across the table and picked up the ring. She slid it on her finger herself. It fit exactly. She looked up at him. You could have asked properly, she said. I'm aware. He didn't move. I was also aware that if I gave you the ring without giving you the choice of how it went on, I'd spend the rest of my life hearing about it. She laughed, really laughed, surprised out of her own chest by it, and she watched his face do the thing it did sometimes when she laughed. That fractional softening, that almost undone quality, the architecture of the architect coming briefly, beautifully apart. Marry me, he said, or I'll kidnap you again. You never actually kidnapped me, she pointed out. I curated your arrival, he said. Same thing. She leaned across the table and kissed him. He brought his hand up to her face and held on. Later, when the papers were signed and the garnet ring sat on her finger and the evening had gone long and warm and full, Raphael appeared at the garden's edge with his arm in a sling, and the look of a man who had waited a very appropriate amount of time before interrupting. The council sends their Khan. This is that game. Congratulations, he said with a gravity that acknowledged he had been waiting a very long time to say those words to his boss. Alessandro looked at him. The council, Alessandro said, can mind its own business. That is approximately what I told them, Raphael agreed. He disappeared. Alessandro looked at Sienna. She looked at him. The garden was dark and warm and full of the sound of the world going on around them, indifferent and busy, not knowing that inside this particular perimeter, something permanent had just been decided. Sienna Romano, he said, testing it, the way he had once set her name across a bar with the assessment of a man who was already certain. She tilted her head. The hyphen, she said. Callaway Romano. A pause. Fine, he said. She smiled. He thought he would remember that smile. That particular, victorious, amber-eyed smile for the rest of however long he had. And that however long that was, it would not be enough. 6 months later, Palazzo was magnificent on a wedding night. Sienna had not chosen it. It had chosen her. Or Alessandro had chosen it for her, with the same unilateral certainty with which he decided everything, appearing at her shoulder 3 months earlier with the expression of a man presenting a fait accompli and saying the restaurant, obviously, while she was trying to make an appointment with a venue coordinator. Obviously, she had repeated. Where else? He had seemed genuinely puzzled by the idea of an alternative. She had not been able to argue with where else. So, the restaurant where it began, the candlelight, the crystal, the low music played by a quartet in the corner, every table filled not with strangers but with the landscape of the life they had built together in 6 months. Raphael at the center table with his arm fully healed, and his expression of a man who had been waiting for this specifically since approximately 1997, when he had first understood his boss well enough to know what it would take. Julia in emerald green, crying already at the toasts and refusing to acknowledge it. Danny Calloway, 24 and solvent and making cautious, wondering conversation with a capo twice his age, Czar Hayes, in the chair beside Danny, who had recovered from her 3 hours in Sebastian's side room with a fury and a dark humor that Alessandro had quietly told Sienna was exactly the caliber of person she should have in her life. Sebastian Rossi had been dealt with by the council. He was alive. He was far away. He would stay there. Julian Nero had withdrawn to his side of a world that did not include New York. He would stay there too. The Romano Empire was rebuilt, reconfigured, and strengthened by the loss of its most elegant internal cancer. Alessandro had spent 3 months restructuring the hierarchy, new captains, new protocols, and in the new operational architecture, a position that had not existed before, and that the older family members had needed time to accept. Head of Internal Intelligence, Sienna Calloway Romano. They had accepted it the way all change was accepted in old institutions. Grudgingly, then neutrally, then with the kind of pride that pretended it had never been otherwise. She stood now in the private upstairs room that had been her dressing room for the evening, in a gown that was not white ivory, with a deep V and an open back and a train that she had argued was excessive and had stopped arguing about when she saw it in the mirror. The garnet ring was on her right hand tonight. In an hour, the Romano family's signet ring, gold, ancient, heavy with meaning, would go on her left. Julia appeared in the doorway. "He's pacing," Julia said. "He doesn't pace," Sienna said. "He has developed a new ability this evening." Sienna turned from the mirror. Julia looked at her for a moment with that gray Romano assessment, then crossed the room and adjusted something at Sienna's shoulder with the practiced efficiency of a woman who was determined not to cry again and was losing the battle. "He was 10 years alone after our father," Julia said quietly, not looking at her. "Running it all alone, not asking anyone for anything." A pause. "Then he pulled your file and kept coming back to it and finally told Raphael he'd found something, and Raphael said he sounded like a man who'd found a loaded weapon and didn't know what to do with it." She looked up. "You are the only person in 34 years who has made my brother not know what to do." Sienna looked at her. "I'm going to marry him," she said, "and I'm going to run intelligence for an Italian crime family, which is not a sentence I anticipated saying at any point in my life." She paused. "I'm also going to make sure he sleeps more than 4 hours a night, which may prove more difficult than all of the rest of it." Julia laughed, real, unguarded, the laugh that made her look 20 instead of 28. "God help you," she said. "I know." Julia kissed her cheek, collected herself, and went downstairs. Alessandro was waiting at the end of the room when she came down the private stair. He had gone very still. That absolute, characteristic stillness. But this time it was not the stillness of a man who was calculating or controlling or waiting to act. This was the stillness of a man who had stopped in the middle of a moment and was simply inside it, not managing it, not planning beyond it, present in a way she had learned was the rarest thing he gave. He was in a black suit, no tie, because some things never changed. He watched her cross the room. Not a quick cataloging look, the other look. The one that had told her everything, the very first time he'd used it across a restaurant floor while she was trying to perform harmlessness. "I see the thing beneath the performance. You look," he began. "Don't say extraordinary," she said. A pause. "I was going to say mine." She stopped in front of him. Close, the same close they had stood in his study 6 months ago, charged with the knowledge that everything was about to change. "Everything had changed. You are infuriatingly sure of yourself," she said. "Yes." He took her hands. Looked at them. The garnet ring on her right hand. The bear left, waiting. "I was wrong about one thing," he said. She looked up at him. "I told you I read your file and decided I wanted you close," he said. "That's true. But it's not the whole truth." His voice was very quiet. "The whole truth is that I read about who you were, what you'd survived, what you'd built from the wreckage, how you kept going, and I felt something I had no framework for." He paused. "I want to spend however long I have building a framework." Her chest ached with how much she meant her next words. "Alessandro, Shut up and put the ring on. He laughed. Genuine, low, real. The laugh she had earned and would spend her life earning, and considered the greatest victory of any intelligence operation she had ever run. He put the ring on. It was heavy and old and meant forever in the language of the family she was becoming part of. Downstairs, the music shifted. Something her and something Alessandro, stitched together by Julia, who had cried about it and then coordinated it with military precision. One more thing, he said, before they went down. She waited. He placed his hand on her waist, deliberate, then moved it. Slowly, with a question in his eyes that she answered with a look, to rest flat against her stomach. She had told him 4 days ago. 8 weeks. He had been still for a very long time after she told him. Then he had said, "Good," in the voice of a man for whom that single word contained everything. Now he looked at her. "She'll have your eyes," he said. "Presumptuous," Sienna said. "Might be a boy." "She'll have your eyes," he repeated, with the certainty of a man who had looked into amber eyes for 6 months and was already irrevocably committed to the future that lived in them. She put her hand over his. Below, the music played and the candles burned, and a city that belonged to the Romano family went about its loud, indifferent night. The restaurant held 40 people who were, in one way or another, evidence that some empires were built not only with blood and strategy, but with the reckless, irreversible act of letting someone in. "Let's go," she said. He offered his arm. She took it, and Sienna Calloway, Romano. Now, all the way down, in the blood oath documents, and the ring and the life being built, and the impossible new thing that had no name yet, but would in 7 months, walked into the room she had first entered as a spy, and left, now, as something she had never expected to be, claimed, chosen, home. Alessandro Romano, the architect, who had never built anything he hadn't planned to the last detail, held her hand at the threshold and felt, for the first time in his life, the clean and terrifying pleasure of not knowing exactly what came next, only that she would be in it,